Chapter 1. The Idea of a Jubilee. 1. The Ancient Reset. Long before spreadsheets or stock exchanges, civilizations knew that unchecked debt could unravel the social fabric. Every few decades, the scribes of Mesopotamia recorded royal decrees called clean slate edicts, cancellations of personal debts, emancipation of debt slaves, and restoration of land to families. The Hebrews called it the Jubilee, described in Leviticus 25, a rhythm of forgiveness every 50 years when each of you shall return to your property, and each of you shall return to your family. These weren't acts of charity, they were acts of survival. In agrarian economies, wealth accumulation by a few meant the loss of labor and military strength for the many. Periodic forgiveness restored balance so that productivity, and faith in the system, could continue. The Jubilee was a macroeconomic reboot written in moral language. 2. The pattern repeats. Across cultures, the same impulse appears. Classical Athens under Solon's Sysakhthia, the shaking off of burdens, 594 BCE, erased debts that had enslaved citizens and limited property ownership by the elite. Ancient China alternated dynastic land reforms to break monopolies that threatened imperial stability. Medieval Islamic law capped usury and required periodic zakat, a redistribution tax acknowledging that wealth ultimately belongs to the community. Each reset was less about generosity than about systemic maintenance. When imbalance becomes structural, mercy becomes math. 3. Modern Jubilees. Fast forward 2 millennia. After World War II, the Allied Debt Conference in London, 1953, forgave over half of West Germany's external debt. The rationale: crushing repayment would paralyze reconstruction and invite extremism. The result: the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. Similar logic guided the Marshall Plan, which invested 2% of U.S. GDP in rebuilding Europe, an act of enlightened self-interest that yielded decades of prosperity and stability. Economists now recognize these as modern jubilees, deliberate resets that preserved capitalism by tempering it with compassion. They illustrate a consistent truth: periodic redistribution isn't anti-market, it's what keeps markets alive. 4. The debt of ignorance. In the 21st century, the most destabilizing deficit is not financial but educational. The World Bank calls it the learning poverty gap: hundreds of millions of children unable to read by age 10, billions of adults excluded from new technologies. This intellectual debt carries interest in the form of inequality, misinformation, and stalled innovation. Canada is hardly immune. Roughly 40% of working-age adults test below the literacy level required for knowledge economy jobs, and digital skills remain uneven across provinces. The cost appears quietly in lower productivity growth and rising polarization. A national, open, free education platform would therefore be a knowledge jubilee, a cancellation of inherited disadvantage through mass access to learning. 5. The moral arithmetic. Why education? Because it transforms forgiveness into empowerment. Traditional jubilees restored land, a learning jubilee restores potential. It treats knowledge as the renewable resource that it is. Historical data support the logic. UNESCO estimates that each additional year of schooling raises average national income by 10%. The OECD calculates that if all 15-year-olds in member countries achieved basic literacy, long-term GDP would rise by 2 to 3%. In Canada, the Conference Board reports a 1% increase in literacy skills correlates with a 2.5% boost in labor productivity. Education repays moral debt with measurable dividends. 6. Lessons from the past. Every successful jubilee shared 3 traits. Universal reach, benefits extended to everyone, preventing resentment. Institutional endorsement, leaders formalized generosity into law. Moral narrative, people believed fairness was patriotic. Translating that pattern today means treating learning as infrastructure, not charity. Just as roads and healthcare are federally coordinated because they serve the whole nation, knowledge networks should be too. Provincial systems can supply diversity, the federal platform supplies unity and scale. 7 of the 21st Century Covenant. Imagine a Canada where every citizen holds a digital learning passport, an account within a national open education platform that records skills, certificates, and community contributions. Access is free, participation rewarded with micro-credentials recognized across provinces. Public research becomes public curriculum. Universities, Indigenous knowledge keepers, and private experts contribute content under open licenses. This is not utopian, it's what the Nordic countries, Singapore, and Estonia are already building. The difference is that Canada could frame it explicitly as restitution, a fair return on the collective wealth generations helped to create. 8 of the Jubilee mindset. The ancient Jubilees were cyclical because imbalance is inevitable. Likewise, education must be continuous. A one-time reform is a holiday, a lifelong platform is a habit. The goal is cultural, make learning renewal as natural as breathing, as expected as taxation, as celebrated as sport. When citizens view knowledge as common property, exploitation becomes harder to justify. Fairness becomes self-replenishing. 9. Closing argument. Every civilization that endured found a way to convert remorse into renewal. The Jubilee was their solution, ours can be the same principle, rendered in fiber optic code instead of clay tablets. A federally funded open education platform is not a budget line, it is the next moral technology, the mechanism by which a modern democracy forgives its historic inequities and converts them into shared intelligence. The ancients would call it mercy. Economists would call it investment. Canadians might simply call it fair. End of Chapter 1. The Idea of a Jubilee. Chapter 2. Hidden Wealth of the People, the Public Foundations of Private Prosperity. 1. The Illusion of Self-Made Wealth.